very much, Nancy. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure being here in Cyber Week like every week. I would like to thank, first of all, the organizers. It's great to see you all here. We're having an excellent panel now. And for this panel, we'll have three highly experienced CISOs who will sit on my right, and three amazing cybersecurity entrepreneurs from Israel. And basically, we're going to let them fight each other. That'll be for 50 minutes. And I will have several questions in multiple areas, mainly around the relationship between CISOs and early stage startups, the do's and don'ts of those sometimes complicated engagements. And of course, we're going to touch on a few specific domains within the cybersecurity world. So without further ado, I would like to call out to the stage the panelists, and they will introduce themselves. All right, so let's start with introductions, starting from you, Roger.
Thank you, Ofer. My name is Roger Hale. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Big ID. We are a startup. We're a US and Israeli-based startup. My career in technology and security goes for over 35 years, operating in the security field for companies like Informatica, Symantec, Brocade Communications. This is really the world that I've chose to live in and the world that I'm passionate about.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in Israel. It's my first time here. My name is Ryan Gurney. I'm a CISO in residence with Weil Ventures. Recently took that position. Before that, I was a CISO at a subdivision of Google. Before that, CISO at Looker, which is a data analytics company. And then before that, I was a CISO at Zendesk, which is a customer support platform. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Hi, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm an operating partner with Weil Ventures. Before that, I spent 21 years at Akamai, where I was the CSO. And before that, since in Israel, apparently it's traditional for founders to always talk about their military pedigree, I was in the United States Air Force, where I did information warfare for Central Command.
All right, entrepreneurs.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shira Shamban, the CEO of Solvo. Solvo is a platform that manages automatically security configuration for cloud applications, automatically based on the needs of every application, uniquely. It's like Okta for non-human identities.
Hey, my name is Lior Yari. I'm the CEO of Grip Security. We introduced the new generation of SaaS security technologies, allowing organizations to discover what applications they use and how they use them, and then govern both data and access governance, have data and access governance capabilities on top of those applications.
Hi, I am Dotan Barnoy. I'm CEO and co-founder of Authamize. We do authorization security. Prior to that, I was at Checkpoint. I joined after they acquired ForceNock. I was the co-founder and CEO at ForceNock. Prior to that, I was one of the two founders of Resec in the network security. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So my first question is to you, CISOs. What are the things that you evaluate when you start working with an early stage vendor? What gets you excited and what gets you concerned?
So I think the most concerning thing is long integration cycles. That if someone says, I've got this great technology, but as you start to dig in, it's going to take you, months and months to actually get it into the environment, that's a big red flag. Because I don't know that the startup has the sort of time and energy to cope with my cycle, and if their cycle's already pretty long, that's going to be concerning. I get really excited when it's something I can see value in almost overnight. Even if I can only see it in a small spot, but to be able to see that so I can show it to my peers so that they can understand what I'm spending money on.
So I got a way that I look at startup tech and bringing tech into a company, I don't think is that much different than the way a VC firm actually will evaluate tech for doing an investment in that process. The life cycle of bringing tech in and operating tech within an organization could be normally is around 3 years, where you have the first year of where you're actually doing that implementation, that long implementation cycle, whatever that time frame is, to be able to then identify your success criteria and then being able to start showing the value of the technology. The second year is where you expand on that to make sure that this is something that you want to have sticky within your environment. And the third year is it meeting those requirements, and am I able to maintain it, or do I have to look at some type of rip and replace or bringing something else on to gap what I can't do? What I like about working with startups is their speed to innovate. And so the feedback loop of identifying things within a new technology to having that come in to actually be able to provide the value that I need to it makes me feel special and different. And it allows me to bring in the values that's contextualized into my organization and how I want to operate. And so I see that value with that. The other side of that, though, is I got to make sure that tech's still going to be around for that 3-year time frame.
Ryan, anything from you?
Kind of echo this. The innovation is really exciting. So having been fortunate to work at some innovative companies, being able to see a solution that comes in that maybe we haven't seen before really excites us, especially if the founders are very excited about it. And then from a practical standpoint, I look for solutions that can it reduce the number of heads that I need in my organization? Do I need to hire a bunch of people to manage this tool? And does it potentially replace other tools, more than one tool that I already am paying for? Those are things that excite me.
Got it. And probably the same question from your side, entrepreneurs. What are the kind of do's and don'ts of engaging with your first customers? If you can share some of your experiences around that topic.
I can share a little bit from my personal experience, so it's not necessarily a do's and don'ts, but it's what worked and didn't work for us. Very often when you find a champion in a big organization, you feel like they're going to sprint with you, but actually they have their own pace. Even if this is a solution that really helps them, a big organization has its own pace of how things work. So as a startup, even though you found a good champion, you need to go and look for another 5 of those if you want to really validate your product and make sure you're really onto something.
So I really like what Andy said about having a simple integration or a quick integration that doesn't take time from the team. I think what we find very helpful is the ability to have like a 20-minute integration. It's a partial value, it's not all of the value you get from the system, but as we get questions and CISOs and security personnel ask us about the risk of installing the system, we just tell them, wait, do a small POC. It takes 15 minutes. You see some of the value, you'll understand the problem that we're solving, and just by having them interact with the dashboard, which looks nice because we worked very hard on it, and see that the technology actually works, we get to a point where we can progress into a larger POC and then a deployment, full deployment. And thinking about the way, from the beginning, we tried to build the product in a way that we can do that, and it really paid off amazingly so far.
Yeah, so for the early engagement with CISOs, it's all about listening. It's about getting the feedback for their needs, their kind of end-to-end use case, how can you help them, and working with them towards that goal. It depends, of course, if you are targeting the enterprise or the mid-market or small, so it really depends on that side. The other thing, and I think I'm echoing Shira here, is respect the process. It's not that you're going to meet a CISO, he says, yes, let's move to a POC, and that's it, right? Tomorrow morning, you're going to integrate it to AWS like in 2 minutes, and the fact that integration is going to be 10 minutes or 20 minutes, that doesn't make the difference. As long as it's not months and you're going to build a tent in their kind of office. The other side of thing is that you need to show the value quick, right? So you need to gain that trust. So integration needs to be reasonable timing. Value needs to be relatively quickly. And then you can still building more and more of those use cases and work together.
So another question for the founders. It's always harder as an early stage startup. So how can a young vendor gain an edge over more established vendors that are competing with you?
I think that, as someone said, different is better than better. sometimes. You need to find the gaps in the existing products, and how can you make the buyer's life easier or better or more secured, and get into that gap, find a good differentiator. We found that automation in decision-making can save a lot of time for the security practitioners, and we decided to put our edge over there.
So, Ofer, I believe you said in one of your podcasts, the time for innovation is not when you have customers screaming at you. When I look at that, when I look at how startups can move quickly and then they can adapt themselves to the needs of the organization, this brings a lot of value to security teams. Bigger players, established players, won't bend for a specific customer, unlike startups who are both eager to learn from the experience of working with a company and eager to bring more value, and they also have the resources to do so and the ability to do so quickly.
Yeah, so it's about the learning, right? Startup is a learning organization. It needs to do everything quick, so the velocity matters. So it's fun for me to be the last, so I just can echo stuff and give it back.
Cool. Let's talk about cloud security, CISOs. It's not a new thing, right? We've been talking about cloud security and the challenges around migration to the cloud for several years now. When you look ahead, what are still the open issues in the cloud, the open security issues in the cloud, and what are the main trends that you are identifying for the next few years?
Thank you for not saying cyber. Jumping right off the top on this, when everyone starts talking about cloud security, they really focus on production, right? And there's so much more to cloud security, and to be able to truly have that holistic pane of glass and the visibility and what you're trying to protect from your organization, because it's not just production. That may be, part of your rev gen, but as a chief security officer, the business model, our internal people, our internal processes that we also have in our own cloud services, as well as those that we may subscribe to, have just that level of need that we have to have visibility and protection. So, whether it's our own, whether it's a SaaS service that we're looking at, we need more visibility, transparency. We need to actually have more say in the process instead of a contract that says that you take security seriously.
Yeah, and then thinking of production access and thinking of the big cloud providers, having worked at companies that built SaaS platforms on those public clouds, for us it's the challenge of not being necessarily locked into a cloud provider and trying to abstract the security layer up, right? So there's really three main cloud providers today. You want to be able to have your security architecture and your tooling be able to go across all those players so that you can have that conversation with the CFO if you need to move to something else, or if you have shadow IT moving workflows to a certain cloud, that you can support it from a security standpoint. And that's what interests me.
I think in the cloud, we see a similar evolution that we've seen with just application programming languages. And one of the challenges that security had over the last 20 years is every time developers would build a new platform, they'd be like, oh, we don't want to develop this in Perl anymore, so we're going to be in PHP, and then Python, and then Haskell, and then Go, and they threw out every piece of infrastructure that had been built for the prior language. And we're seeing that same evolution in the cloud. Whether we're using containers or Kubernetes or Docker, this continuous reinvention of the underlying platform makes these security challenges even harder. It's not just AWS versus Azure versus GCP. It's every one of the deployment methodologies needs to be supported by the users.
Shira, I would like to hear your take on cloud security.
Well, this is a very broad question, and I think that this is why you have 3 different companies here that are doing cloud security, but are doing very, very different things. So unfortunately, I don't think there is one solution for all of the problems in the cloud. And as an organization, you always have to prioritize what in the cloud are your crown jewels and are the more important areas or riskier areas in your application that require special care, besides from the very, very good security practices that everyone needs to implement when they write code or with their layer 8, the layer of the users, of the people in the organization. So I think that the cloud is not really different than on-prem in the sense that it should be protected. And luckily today, there are plenty of very good solutions that try to automate the solution for the problem.
So we can't really avoid COVID-related questions, so I have a couple. I would like to ask the founders, what are the general market climate changes that you've seen in the past 12 months and the differences between like pre-COVID world and what's going on these days, and even if you can imagine the near-term future?
So the last 6 to 12 months, I don't think we saw a lot of climate change because we were stuck at home. And this is kind of a new way of doing business. So I think a lot of salespeople are really sad because everyone was doing their quota but not traveling as much. And that's kind of proved to us that you can have a relationship, a distance relationship, and still create trust, test solutions. It requires the different vendors, of course, to adjust themselves, to have a solution that can fit that. But I think this will probably be the way business will be done down the road. So things will open up, there are going to be meetings, and we're going to travel to, I guess, Las Vegas now is RSA, and we're going to meet at Black Hat and so on, and here. But there's going to be a fundamental change in the way we consume those solutions, vendors, CISOs, organizations, and how we test them, and for me, that's actually good. I think this, in a certain way, kind of leveling the plane between us and the huge kind of Checkpoint and Palo Alto and all of those.
So I have a flight to San Francisco tonight. And it's funny because next week I'll have half of the amount of CISO meetings, customer meetings that I used to have compared to working from home using Zoom. Going abroad, you need to spend time driving from location to location, have buffers for your meetings, and you can meet with less customers than sitting at my kitchen at home with a virtual background and talking about Grip. It doesn't mean we should not go and meet customers face to face. I think this week as well was an amazing opportunity to meet many of the people that I've been talking with for the last year or so. But it changed the dynamics of how you build relationships. Looking specifically at security and what we do, I think for many startups it presented an opportunity because not only sales processes were changed, but the way just employees work is different now. So it is expected from bigger companies to allow employees to work from the home environment, which resulted in a lot of new security needs that need a solution. And I don't think legacy solutions are capable of handling those. So I'm sure it would create a new array of exciting security startups that will come up in the next few years. And I think we have some of those here as well.
Maybe to sum up everything that was said here so far, yes, we learned that we can make business over Zoom, but we're human beings and we still want to meet each other in person, and the relationship that we create with one another when we meet for coffee or when we take a trip in Tel Aviv is so different than the many times that I met some of the people here only over Zoom. So it's a chance to strengthen our muscle of building a digital relationship, but also I think that all of us really missed meeting people in person and creating a different kind of relationship.
And how does that look from the buyer's side? What have changed, if at all?
So some interesting metrics in this area. From having to operate, and I operate not just information security, but also IT in my role. A lot of the IT operational functions, the productivity has actually gone up with work from home. But I think part of that also falls through that that hours of the day that you actually work have kind of blurred over that same time frame, because now everyone is a little bit more of a disparate workforce. Instead of showing in, clocking in, starting your business day, meetings start at 9. In my role, I'm operating on Tel Aviv time. I'm operating on East Coast time, West Coast time, and so it's spanning out the day. But I don't have that travel time. And so that I can actually integrate more of that time. My teams can integrate more of their time to be able to be available, which is where we see that the operational efficiencies and the productivities go up. At the same time, we are missing that face-to-face component, which is what builds the trust and builds the relationships that really build those teams together. This is the first international flight I've had since CyberTech last year. And so, this is the first time to get out, to be able to reach out and actually talk to people face to face. My engineering team here in Tel Aviv, to actually be able to work with them directly, and where we have more efficiency in that time frame. I had some amazing conversations this week that I would not have been able to have over Zoom. So there's the pros and cons on both sides of it, and you got to measure that operational efficiency with that the team building and the ability to maintain the staff and that trust.
I would just add that this pandemic's given everybody an opportunity to look internally of how they support remote work and adjust. That helps with recruiting, obviously. With folks, but it's also helped look at SaaS applications as viabilities for some businesses that may not have looked at that as much in the past. And I think you've seen an uptick in management saying, what does our BCP plan look like lately? This pandemic, along with ransomware, makes people look at these things. So I think it's preparing companies for a future.
I think there's an opportunity going forward. I agree with everything said so far, so I'm not going to repeat that. But to focus on how to do distributed collaboration in your technology, rather than relying on the face-to-face collaboration. Hey, look at this thing I just saw on this console. Well, Ryan and I are now in different continents, and I want to be able to share what I saw with him, and how does that happen? Like, is it something I can even screen share over Zoom, or is your font so tiny that that's useless? I think there's a lot of opportunity to look forward and say, how do I make my tool the centerpiece of somebody's collaborative environment, rather than something nobody wants to show because, you can't look at it?
Yeah. This one is for Dotan. Continuing on COVID and work from home, have you seen any changes to the identity and access management field? What have changed? Are things more complicated these days, in terms of managing identities and managing access of employees and entities in general to corporate assets?
Yeah, so we saw change, of course, and I remember a conversation I had with a CISO in New York about attribute-based access control, and he said, everyone is working from wherever. What's the meaning of attribute? So if they're not in the office and they're in Jersey, shouldn't they do the same work now because they can't come to the office? So that's one thing. The other thing I think the last 10 years were all about the authentication. We talked about, kind of Okta is maybe one of the big winners, but we like to say zero trust. I think we haven't said zero trust yet. So zero trust. Now we have a V on the zero trust, right? So, you want to design things from the inside out. You want to have your crown jewels. You already have your identities. Now the question is the map between them. So now I don't trust you. I verify that you are who you say you are. Now I need to assign to you the right access policies to the asset. So I need to understand my asset as well. So companies like Big ID and other companies kind of give me that side of the map. Okta, Azure Active Directory, and so on give me that side of the map. And what we saw, and this is kind of what Optimize is coming to solve, is the connection between those. So I think there is a challenge now that is beyond just the authentication and verifying that you are who you say you are, or just mapping the assets. Now we can't just rely on having you are who you say you are, and I'm going to do an attribute-based, you're in the office, so you should get X, or if you're out of the office, you're going to get Y. So that's a major change.
Any additional observations from the CISO side?
Yeah, and especially after what you just said. And by the way, I'm always shy and don't have anything to say ever. The COVID challenge in the middle of that is the fact that as we're a distributed workforce, we don't have centralized IT for distribution. You know, come to the office, come down, have that. So as you're doing that, talking about how do you authenticate across that process, you're seeing a large shift of bring your own device. Or, you know, what can you get? Because supply chain is very challenging right now. And, you know, can you get the equipment that you need to be able to do this, even for the cloud providers? And so that ties into even being able to go cross hybrid cloud and more disparate cloud to be able to operate those services. And then how are you actually going to manage the authentication across that? Because you can't go all in with native one cloud. And you can't go all in with this is the hardware that I can buy for my entire company and I can bring it out and distribute it because it's not available.
I was pretty fortunate because at Akamai we'd already made the pivot to a zero trust environment where we'd built this 19-story skyscraper headquarters in Cambridge that we occupied for 100 days. But we built it as a Starbucks. Like, it was Wi-Fi open to anybody, and we had to authenticate and authorize everybody continuously. So when COVID happened, it was a non-event for us. There was no worries. In fact, the IT team was more worried than I was. Because they're like, we have to test before we send people home. And I'm like, we test all the time anyway. Like, every time there's a snowstorm, nobody comes into the building. And so having that deliberate plan made COVID easier for us. And I think there's more opportunity for people to think about resilient architectures, although I guess they got to think a lot about it for the last 15 months.
Let's switch topic and talk about data security, another hot space that we see a lot of activity among entrepreneurs. And I would like to start with you, Roger, as a CISO of large enterprises and also now CISO of a vendor in this space. What are the main opportunities for entrepreneurs to do something unique and interesting around data security?
One of my favorite soapboxes. The pandemic and COVID really brought this to light, because now as we're talking about different services running in disparate types of cloud scenarios, not just a different type of SaaS that has, you know, the regular standard enterprise hooks within it to operate, is, you know, that shift in conversation around, is it an identity on a person for access, or are you first starting looking at the data and doing a risk assessment of the data to understand what this data means to you if it gets out, how do you protect that, but also looking at where that data is migrating to, whether it's from a human identity, whether it's from a digital identity, because no data stands alone, no system stands alone. The value of data is being able to do that analytics and the computation and then sharing of that information across systems to distribute it to actually bring your business model together. So the data has to travel. Access to that data has to change. And the risk and the value of that data changes based upon the systems that it's in, based upon the access and the decisions that are being made based upon that data. So the opportunity when you're talking about data protection is really, especially with the pandemic, especially with privacy and healthcare coming in to be more forefront during the same time frame, GDPR coming right before the healthcare conversation, to understand that data protection isn't a information security conversation alone. It's a data governance conversation. It's a data privacy conversation. And how you operationalize that creates the efficiencies, the operational efficiencies that we look to startups to bring in, looking at ways of how to do things better, be more efficient, to give us faster access to that data so we can make better decisions faster.
Ryan, what were your main issues around data security?
Sure, yeah. Well, as CISOs, for myself, and if I'm thinking as an entrepreneur, we still struggle as CISOs with creating policies that are written on documents that maybe we can't monitor and enforce very easily. So if you think about a business idea in that area, that's a great area. The second area is there's business processes that either people struggle to do and are rife with error, or they don't want to do in security. And that's an area rife for innovation in general. But if I think about one of those is a topic like information classification, right? Being able even to know what should be classified, how it should be classified, where my crown jewels are, was a struggle many years ago, and now we have some interesting, innovative tools out there that are coming to the market that I would have loved to have years ago that are available to us now. So in general, I think we're getting better at this topic because of the tools and the innovation, but it's still a challenge to manage it, especially when we think about access to the data and where it can get exfiltrated to, especially into SaaS apps and otherwise.
Lior, I would like to ask you, as the CEO of a SaaS security company, CASB has been with us for years, protecting SaaS applications. So what are the trends that you identified in the last year or so that made you realize that a new solution is required? What has changed?
Sure, thank you, Ofer. So I'll start with a topic that relates to the data protection question. And data today is not only stored in databases of the company, it's traveling around between employees, third-party vendors, which are SaaS, and servers and whatnot. And there's a game I always suggest people to play. Open your downloads folder and see how many business-critical files you have there. I know I have some because every time I need to consult with the company's budget, I go to my download folders and search there instead of going to the budget in the network drive. But then do the same thing on your private device, and what you'll realize is that if someone left his computer at work and came back and had a business meeting, they would download the presentation before presenting it. And they would not delete this presentation afterwards, so the data is moving around outside of the company's perimeter, always. And when we look at SaaS application use is growing tremendously for the past 10 years, and it's expected to continue to grow for the next 10 years. So the average enterprise today uses over 300 applications. When we meet with bigger organizations, they sometimes use 1,500 applications, and many of them are used for a business-critical purpose. And I think over 50% of them, like the top 10 will always be secured, and they would be connected to an IDP, to Okta or an equivalent. But as you go out to the marketing teams and the customer support teams and the security team as well, you realize that 50% of what they use is not properly governed, configured, not even visible to the vendor assessment team. And when we wanted to come in, we wanted to help companies understand what they use, who is using the applications, and add additional layers of data and access governance to those, because the challenge CASBs are failing to cover is being able to govern applications at enterprise scale, being able to actually get a grip on the applications and the usage. And there's a huge gap there that we're not the only ones who are trying to solve, and I don't think we'll be the only solution that would be used to solve the entire problem, but we're building something that would fit into a suite of solutions that will help solve this ongoing, ever-growing problem of SaaS.
Questions to the CISOs, and I would like to ask on behalf of the entrepreneurs that are in the audience, ideating, thinking about what's next, how can I build a big company in the future. Can you name one or two domains or problems that you think that big companies can be built on top of them if you solve those problems in the right way?
GRC and third-party risk management. I think the third-party risk management space is ripe for disruption, and it could be disrupted from the GRC side rather than from the acquisition side. I think right now everything comes in from the acquiring company's perspective, and there's a place for the people who are selling their services to be able to solve that problem instead.
All right.
It'd be good to clone humans. That would help for security professionals. But if we can't go there, I think an area that's interesting is incident response and around how you manage an incident and a security breach, especially when we think about ransomware, we think about nation states. Often at companies I've been at, you have your incident response plan. It's ready to go. You don't practice it enough. You don't deal with the situations that you sometimes hear in the news enough. And it'd be great to have a platform that helped manage that a little bit better, including communication to customers, internal dialogue with lawyers, some level of chat. So I think there's an interesting area there to speed up incident response.
So Andy and I are running our buzzword bingo card up here. So the buzz term is continuous compliance. I have to agree with the supply chain, what the true supply chain is with that, and actually start taking the supply chain and learnings that you have from physical supply chain and hardware, bringing that into the software world. But continuous compliance. But forget about, I can do SOC 2, because there's a lot of people that can do that right now. Take compliance from my position, because my compliance is I need to audit once, and I need to attest many to disparate regulatory compliance and industry compliance around the globe. So bring me something that can actually help me with that. That will tie in with the third party as well. This is a huge open market. And the other one that I want to throw out there as well is give me some portable dynamic masking so that I can carry with me from system to system to enforce those policies that are right now just written on paper. Those would be some great areas. And when you're thinking about this, the last thing I want to say on this one is, if you want to talk to me about it, don't start with, this is the industry conversation. My question back to you is going to be, what problem are you solving contextually for me? Not what problem are you solving for the industry so much. But are you looking at this for the way that operator is looking at this? And let me help.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk also about investors and the relationship between founders and investors. And this is a question for you, founders. What are the main differences in your pitch or the way that you describe yourself and your company when you talk with a prospective investor and when you talk with a prospective customer? What are the key highlights that you put in each different conversation?
I think that from the prospect point of view, they want to understand how can I help them today or in the near future to solve a real pain that they're having right now. Whereas the investor would probably like to know how am I going to become the next unicorn? How can I execute my vision to innovate a specific domain where I work? And how am I different than all the other entrepreneurs who want to do the same?
I think what's very important for investors at this stage is traction, understanding from you how you experience your relationships with different prospective customers, potential customers. And I don't think CISOs care about. Maybe they do. They want customer recommendations from other CISOs that work with you, but they don't care how fast they integrated you, how many of them exist, and what is the sales cycle you had with different customers in the pipeline. Unlike VCs, who I think this is mostly what they care about at this point. VCs also look at how you build a company. So can you hire a team? Can you attract talent? Can you convince potential executives to join your company? And again, for CISOs, it doesn't matter as long as the product is working. It always does, but they won't ask you about it.
I would say in both cases you are building trust, right? You're building relationship. But in the case of a VC, you're building a trust, and you're telling a big story, right? It's not a problem. As Shira mentioned, you want to solve tomorrow morning. It needs to be a big market, it needs to be a growing market. The team is interesting. There's a lot of kind of parts into kind of the relationship you're building, and they're trusting your kind of view of where things are going. When you're meeting a prospect and you're building the trust, the credibility, you have the discussion, but it has to get down to the demo. I remember this slide that used to be, shut up and get to the demo, right? Or something like that. So really talk about, don't start your 15-minute, out of 30 minutes, your 15 minutes about the industry and the trends and storytelling about general things. Get down to the point, let them understand, listen to them, to their needs, and let them understand where you're coming in. And I think it's tapping into the something we mentioned previously, the difference between a startup and you're not going to be a large vendor. You're not going to replace a solution because you're doing something 1% better. It needs to be meaningful. It needs to have a there's a lot of problems that needs to be solved, right? You need to tap into something that has an urgency to be solved, and it's a different discussion altogether.
Gentlemen, you three all wore both hats in your career, so I would be interested to hear from your perspective, what are some common mistakes or pitfalls when you engage with entrepreneurs, both as prospective investors and prospective customers?
I think the biggest mistake that I've seen from the entrepreneur side is trying to walk in and sell yourself rather than your product in your company. Right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs who'll walk in and they want to tell you, well, here was my
and you're talking as a prospective customer, not a prospective investor.
Right? When as an investor, that's what you want to know. You want to know that this human can execute. As a customer, you want to know that this product will work. Because I've met a lot of people who were brilliant, great history, but their product didn't work. And that's what I want to get to as the buyer. I want to know, does the product work? Whereas as the investor, you don't have a product. I want to know that you are going to get to a good product, and hopefully that is the right fit.
Yeah, as the CISO and as the buyer, sometimes it's frustrating when folks come in and they don't understand the actual problem, like they haven't articulated the problem, and then why they're innovative in that space, and understanding my business and the risks that I care about. If you can't articulate that really quickly, then you start getting tuned out a little bit. And then the second part of that is, I want to see your product. Many CISOs, I think, are visual. We want to see what it looks like. How does it help me? And sometimes we wait too long to show a demo, and we talk about the theory before we get to what it looks like. And so those are a couple things.
Death by PowerPoint. And we've only got 3 minutes left, so I don't know if I can go through all of the mistakes I've made. There's more than that. When you're talking to VCs, when you're talking to customers, and you're trying to sell yourself and sell your product, one of the biggest mistakes that I see being made is you tell them, right? Don't tell a VC, because he's the one writing the check, right? He's really good at knowing what tech's out there. That's why he has a checkbook. The CISOs, we're paid to know what our company needs and what our risks are. Don't tell us. Sit down and have a conversation with us, right? Let's talk about why this is important. And again, that's like, what problem can you help me solve? Not what problem that everyone else is having and why this is important to them. How do you think about that problem? It's to ask you to not step on your toes, but to be able to get to that conversation and get that trust and that shared communication. How do you see the problem, and what is the approach that you're taking? And create that relationship and that engagement and communication to be able to then, expand not just on what you see today as an entrepreneur or what I see today as a CISO of what I need, and where I'm going to Ofer going, hey, what do you got out there, because I have a gap here. But, be prepared to take it way beyond that starting point and have that conversation and understand it's a shared vision and a shared conversation.
Agreed. Continuing a follow-up question about investors, what are the main aspects in which you as entrepreneurs can leverage your investors, and where can your investors help the most for you to build a big company?
So I actually been in the industry for a while, so I can say there was a shift in the 5 years. Kind of the discussion of the board meeting, the way it's kind of you have an investor and they were like a committee that checks up on you every once in a while, and then it changed. And it was a shift for an investor as a strategic partner that helps you. And then most of them, our discussion with our investors starts with our ask, what we need. And it's usually around more connection to customers, to partners. It could be around, in Israel now, it's extremely hard to do talent acquisition. So that's a very competitive domain now. So that's something they help with. And I think the VC role, they kind of got that. And that's part of the role they're playing now. And this is part of what they are selling to companies, right? That becomes different. Weil knows it quite well. You have very substantial connections, CISO connections. So I would probably argue that today it's a market for you buying a VC, kind of. You need to choose the VC that shows you that they can generate the value that you need in the early stage, and then afterwards, right, when you grow.
So a VC has a lot of experience, and I think entrepreneurs should leverage their experience both to meet with customers and find a VC that is able to introduce them to customers, but also do the little things like review a presentation before you present it to another investor, or to help you pronounce the right cold outreach email to a customer. There's a lot of things that could be done, and I think you should leverage your investors for them.
I think that the most important thing when you choose your strategic investor is to make sure that it's the right partner for you. I believe in personal relationships, and it should be the right person you would feel comfortable calling and talking about the really nasty stuff that happened to you. Not only the nice stuff about the great customers and the great feedback that we've been getting, but to talk about the things that you feel less comfortable talk about, and to get the right advice at the right time.
And we're just out of time. And so with that, I would like to thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you, and have a great conference. Thank you very much.